The complete truth of Palestine in the Bible. What most Christians never hear. Everyone talks about Israel and Palestine today. The news is saturated with it. Social media explodes over it. Political leaders debate it. You will be shocked when you find 5 discoveries about Palestine. Discovery 1. Where did the word Palestine come from? Here's something that will shock most people. The term Palestine is not used in the Bible the way modern culture presents it. In fact, when you search for Palestine in Scripture, you'll find it's barely there at all. And when it does appear, it means something completely different than what the world thinks today. The word that gets translated as Palestine in some older Bible versions, like the King James, is actually Philistia, the land of the Philistines. Let me show you what I mean. Exodus 15:14. The people shall hear and be afraid. Sorrow shall take hold on the inhabitants of Palestina. Joel 3:4. Yea, and what have ye to do with me, O Tyre, and Zidon, and all the coasts of Palestine? Will ye render me a recompense? And if ye recompense me, swiftly and speedily will I return your recompense upon your own head. In both cases, the original Hebrew word is Pelesheth, Philistia, not Palestine, Philistia, the land of Israel's ancient coastal enemies. Now here's what you need to understand about the Philistines. They were a seafaring people, possibly from Crete or the Aegean region, who settled along the Mediterranean coast of what is now modern-day Gaza and southern Israel around 1200 BC. They weren't Semitic. They weren't Arab. They weren't related to the Israelites or the surrounding peoples. They lived in 5 main cities: Gaza, Ashkelon, Ashdod, Ekron, and Gath. You know these names from the Bible. This is where Goliath came from, Goliath of Gath. This is where Samson fought his battles. This is where the Ark of the Covenant was taken when it was captured. This is the enemy that David fought throughout his life. The Philistines were technologically advanced for their time. They had iron weapons when most of the region was still using bronze. They were fierce warriors. They were Israel's most persistent enemy for centuries. But here's the critical point that changes everything. The Philistines went extinct as a people group. Completely. Utterly. Gone. They were gradually absorbed into other cultures and disappeared from history over 2,500 years ago. By the time of the Babylonian exile, they were already fading. By the time of the Romans, they were a distant memory. There is no genetic continuity between ancient Philistines and modern Palestinians. None. There is no cultural connection, no linguistic link, no archaeological evidence of continuity. The Philistines spoke a language that's now dead. They worshipped gods that no one worships anymore: Dagon, Astarte. Their culture vanished completely from human history. So where did the modern term Palestine come from? If the Philistines disappeared 2,500 years ago, why is their name attached to this land today? Here's the historical truth that will blow your mind. In 135 AD, the Roman Emperor Hadrian faced a massive Jewish revolt. The Bar Kokhba Rebellion was the 3rd major Jewish uprising against Roman rule, and it was devastating. Over 500,000 Jews died. Jerusalem was completely destroyed, again. The Romans were so furious, so determined to break Jewish identity once and for all, that they decided to literally erase the Jewish connection to the land. Hadrian renamed Judea, the heartland of the Jewish people, the name that meant Land of the Jews, to Syria Palestina. He deliberately chose the name of Israel's ancient enemies, the long-extinct Philistines, to humiliate and mock the Jewish people. Think about that for a moment. Imagine if a conquering power took over your homeland and renamed it after your worst historical enemy. That's what Rome did. It would be like conquering America and renaming it British Loyalist territory to mock the Revolutionary War. Or conquering France and calling it Greater Germany to humiliate them. And here's what most people don't realize. For nearly 2,000 years after that, Palestine was simply a geographic region, like the Midwest or the Mediterranean. The people living there during those centuries were Arabs, yes, but they didn't call themselves Palestinians. They identified by their tribes, Bedouins, for example. They identified by their villages. They identified by their families and clans. In fact, here's something that will shock you. Before 1948, if someone said Palestinian, they were more likely referring to Jews than Arabs. The Palestine Post was a Jewish newspaper. It's now the Jerusalem Post. The Palestine Orchestra was made up of Jewish musicians. It became the Israel Philharmonic. When the British ruled the region as the Palestinian Mandate from 1920 to 1948, Palestinian Jews and Palestinian Arabs both lived there. The modern Palestinian national identity didn't crystallize until the 20th century, primarily after 1948, when Israel became a nation. That's not to say Arabs didn't live in the region. They absolutely did. Discovery 3. God's prophetic timeline for the land. Now, let me show you something that should take your breath away. He predicted exactly what would happen to them, both the tragedy and the triumph. Ezekiel 36:24. For I will take you from among the heathen, and gather you out of all countries, and will bring you into your own land. Isaiah 11:11-12. And it shall come to pass in that day, that the Lord shall set his hand again the second time to recover the remnant of his people, which shall be left from Assyria, and from Egypt, and from Pathros, and from Cush, and from Elam, and from Shinar, and from Hamath, and from the islands of the sea. And he shall set up an ensign for the nations, and shall assemble the outcasts of Israel, and gather together the dispersed of Judah from the four corners of the earth. The second time. The first time was the return from Babylonian exile. The second time? That's happening now. But here's the prophecy that should send chills down your spine. Luke 21:24. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. Jesus predicted that Jerusalem would be trampled by non-Jewish peoples until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. For 1,897 years, from 70 AD to 1967 AD, that prophecy was reality. Romans, Byzantines, Arabs, Crusaders, Mamluks, Ottomans, British, everyone controlled Jerusalem except the Jews. But then something happened. In 1948, Israel became a nation again after 2,000 years of not existing. That wasn't politics. That was prophecy. In 1967, during the Six-Day War, Israel recaptured Jerusalem. For the first time since 70 AD, the city of David was back in Jewish hands. That wasn't military strategy. That was prophecy. Discovery 4. Jesus' warning. Jesus wasn't vague about what would happen in the last days concerning Jerusalem. In fact, he gave us clear, specific, detailed warnings that should make every believer sit up and pay attention. These aren't symbolic parables. These aren't spiritual metaphors. These are prophetic declarations about actual events that will unfold in actual time and space. Let me show you what I mean. Luke 21, 20-24. And when ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, then know that the desolation thereof is nigh. Then let them which are in Judea flee to the mountains, and let them which are in the midst of it depart out. And let not them that are in the countries enter thereinto. For these be the days of vengeance, that all things which are written may be fulfilled. But woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. For there shall be great distress in the land, and wrath upon this people. And they shall fall by the edge of the sword, and shall be led away captive into all nations. And Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. When ye shall see Jerusalem compassed with armies, not if, when? Jesus spoke of this as absolute certainty. Jerusalem surrounded by armies, under siege, facing desolation. This prophecy had a partial fulfillment in 70 AD, when the Roman legions under Titus surrounded Jerusalem, starved the city, and then destroyed it completely. Over 1 million Jews died. The temple was demolished. Survivors were scattered to the ends of the earth. But here's what should give you chills. This prophecy has a future fulfillment too. Because Jesus said, Jerusalem shall be trodden down of the Gentiles, until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. That word, until, is critical. It means there's an end point. It means Gentile domination of Jerusalem is temporary, not permanent. And it means when that time ends, something dramatic happens. We watched part of that until expire in 1967 when Israel recaptured Jerusalem. But the final fulfillment is still coming. Because the nations aren't done with Jerusalem yet. Now look at what the prophet Zechariah saw. And remember, this was written 2,500 years ago, long before modern nation-states, long before the UN, long before global organizations even existed. Zechariah 12:2-3. Behold, I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about, when they shall be in the siege both against Judah and against Jerusalem. And in that day will I make Jerusalem a burdensome stone for all people. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces, though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it. Let me break this down because it's absolutely staggering in its precision. I will make Jerusalem a cup of trembling unto all the people round about, a cup that causes trembling, shaking, reeling, like someone who's drunk and can't walk straight. The nations won't be able to handle Jerusalem. They'll obsess over it, fight about it, pass endless resolutions about it, but they won't be able to solve it or control it. Does that sound familiar? The UN has passed more resolutions about Israel and Jerusalem than any other conflict on earth. The nations are literally trembling over this one city. A burdensome stone for all people. Ever tried to lift a stone that's too heavy? You strain, you struggle, you might hurt yourself. That's what the nations are doing with Jerusalem. They're trying to move something that God has made immovable. But here's the terrifying part. All that burden themselves with it shall be cut in pieces. Not just struggle, not just fail, cut in pieces, destroyed, judged. And then look at the scope. Though all the people of the earth be gathered together against it. Not some nations, not regional enemies, not just Israel's immediate neighbors, all the people of the earth. We are watching this happen right now. The entire world, from the UN to the EU to international human rights organizations to college campuses to social media platforms, is obsessed with Israel and Jerusalem. A nation the size of New Jersey with 9 million people gets more attention than China. Zechariah 14:2. For I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle, and the city shall be taken, and the houses rifled, and the women ravished, and half of the city shall go forth into captivity, and the residue of the people shall not be cut off from the city. All nations, not some, not many, all, gathered against one city. But then comes the intervention. Zechariah 14:3-4. Then shall the Lord go forth and fight against those nations as when he fought in the day of battle. And his feet shall stand in that day upon the Mount of Olives, which is before Jerusalem on the east. And the Mount of Olives shall cleave in the midst thereof toward the east and toward the west. And there shall be a very great valley. And half of the mountain shall remove toward the north, and half of it toward the south. Jesus Christ himself will return to defend Jerusalem. His feet will touch the Mount of Olives, the same place he ascended from in Acts 1. The mountain will literally split in two. Geography itself will change when the king returns. But there's one more warning we need to see. Jesus gave it on the Mount of Olives, looking at the temple, just days before his crucifixion. Matthew 24:15-21. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, stand in the holy place. Whoso readeth, let him understand. Then let them which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. Neither let him which is in the field return back to take his clothes. And woe unto them that are with child, and to them that give suck in those days. But pray ye that your flight be not in the winter, neither on the Sabbath day. For then shall be great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. The abomination of desolation, stand in the holy place. The holy place is the temple. This means there will be a temple standing in Jerusalem during the end times, and something or someone will defile it in the most horrific way possible. Daniel told us what that is. Daniel 11:31. And arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they shall place the abomination that maketh desolate. The Antichrist will stop the Jewish sacrifices. He'll set up an image of himself. He'll demand worship. And that's when all hell breaks loose on earth. Jesus said this triggers great tribulation, such as was not since the beginning of the world to this time, no, nor ever shall be. Not like the Holocaust, not like World War I or II, not like any genocide or war in history. Worse, the worst suffering humanity will ever experience. And it all centers on Jerusalem. Jesus wasn't vague. He said that in the last days, Jerusalem would be the epicenter of the final spiritual war. Not New York, not Beijing, not Moscow, not Brussels, Jerusalem. A city most people couldn't find on a map 100 years ago. A city that had no strategic value, no oil, no ports, no natural resources. Yet it's the focus of end times prophecy. Why? Because this isn't about politics. This isn't about territory. This is about God's purposes colliding with Satan's rebellion. This is about heaven's agenda versus hell's resistance. This is about the return of the king to the city he chose. Could today's headlines be the setup for the Antichrist's covenant? Could the current push for Middle East peace be paving the way for the deception Daniel predicted? Could the international obsession with dividing Jerusalem be the very thing that triggers God's judgment on the nations? When you see the nations gathering against Jerusalem, and we're seeing it happen, when you see the peace plans that require dividing God's city, and we're seeing them proposed, when you see the temple preparations accelerating, and we're seeing them advance, you're not watching politics. You're watching prophecy in motion, and the clock is ticking toward midnight. Discovery 5. The False Peace and the Final War. Here's where everything we've discussed comes together. The land promises, the family conflict, the regathering of Israel, the obsession with Jerusalem. It's all leading to one event, a false peace treaty that triggers the final war. Daniel 9:27. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week. And in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. The Antichrist will offer a 7-year peace covenant. After thousands of years of conflict, someone will finally broker the deal everyone has been waiting for. Peace in the Middle East, security for Israel, recognition from Arab nations, international approval. But it's a trap. Revelation 11:1-2. And there was given me a reed like unto a rod, and the angel stood, saying, Rise, and measure the temple of God, and the altar, and them that worship therein. But the court which is without the temple leave out, and measure it not. For it is given unto the Gentiles, and the holy city shall they tread under foot 42 months. A temple will be standing. Sacrifices will be offered. But halfway through the 7 years, after 42 months, everything changes. 2 Thessalonians 2:4. Who opposeth and exalteth himself above all that is called God, or that is worshipped, so that he as God sitteth in the temple of God, showing himself that he is God. The Antichrist will enter the temple, stop the sacrifices, and declare himself to be God. That's the abomination of desolation. That's when the Great Tribulation begins. That's when the final war starts. A third temple, a peace treaty, a betrayal. We're closer than we think. What role does Turkey play in the end times? Prophecy watchers focus on Israel, Russia, Iran, and China. But they're missing Turkey. Ezekiel 38 names 5 ancient territories in what is now Turkey, and modern Turkey is positioning itself exactly where biblical prophecy predicted 2,600 years ago. There are 6 findings that prove Turkey may play the most explosive role in end times events. Number 1. The nation at the crossroads of prophecy. To understand Turkey's role in the end times, we first need to establish something critical. Is Turkey actually mentioned in the Bible? Because if there's no biblical reference to this nation, then what Turkey does politically or militarily has no prophetic significance. But if Turkey is mentioned in Scripture, if God predicted its role in the last days, then we need to pay very close attention to what's happening there right now. So let me show you 3 ways Turkey appears in biblical prophecy. And the evidence is overwhelming. Connection. Number 1. Turkey equals the ancient lands of Magog, Meshech, Tubal, Gomer, and Togarmah. Turn to Ezekiel 38. This is one of the most detailed end times prophecies in the entire Bible. It describes a massive invasion of Israel by a coalition of nations. Ezekiel 38, 1-6. And the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, set thy face against Gog, the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and prophesy against him, and say, Thus saith the Lord God, Behold, I am against thee, O Gog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal, and I will turn thee back, and put hooks into thy jaws, and I will bring thee forth, and all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor, even a great company with bucklers and shields, all of them handling swords, Persia, Ethiopia, and Libya with them, all of them with shield and helmet, Gomer and all his bands, the house of Togarmah of the north quarters, and all his bands, and many people with thee. Let me identify these ancient names with their modern locations. Gog, the land of Magog. This is the leader and primary territory. Scholars debate whether this is Russia or Turkey. Russia identification. Based on the phrase chief prince, Hebrew Rosh, some identify this as Russia. Magog's descendants are traced to regions north of the Black Sea. Turkey identification. Others place Magog in eastern Turkey, ancient Anatolia, where Magog's descendants historically settled. The debate continues, but what's not debatable is that Turkey is involved either way, because even if Russia leads, Turkey's territories are explicitly listed. Meshech and Tubal. These are clearly in Turkey. Historical and archaeological evidence places Meshech, Western Turkey, ancient Phrygia, near modern-day Ankara. Tubal, Eastern Turkey, ancient Cilicia, southeastern Turkey. These are not Russia. These are definitively Turkish territories. Gomer. Ancient Gomer settled in what is now Turkey. The Cimmerians, descended from Gomer, occupied central and western Turkey. Some historians also connect Gomer to ancient Armenia, which borders Turkey. The house of Togarmah of the north quarters. Togarmah is explicitly identified with Turkey in historical sources. Genesis 10 lists Togarmah as a son of Gomer. The phrase "of the north quarters" means from the far north, relative to Israel, and Turkey is directly north of Israel. The evidence is clear. Whether Magog is Russia or Turkey is debatable, but Meshech, Tubal, Gomer, and Togarmah are undeniably in modern Turkey. Turkey isn't a minor participant in Ezekiel 38. Turkey is geographically central to the invasion prophecy. Connection number 2. Turkey equals the location of the 7 churches in Revelation. Here's something most Christians don't realize. The 7 churches in Revelation 2-3 were all located in what is now Turkey. Revelation 1:4. John to the 7 churches which are in Asia. Asia here doesn't mean the continent. It refers to the Roman province of Asia, located in western Turkey, Anatolia. The 7 cities were Ephesus, western Turkey, near modern Izmir; Smyrna, western Turkey, modern Izmir; Pergamos, western Turkey, modern Bergama; Thyatira, western Turkey, modern Akhisar; Sardis, western Turkey, modern Sart; Philadelphia, western Turkey, modern Alaşehir; Laodicea, western Turkey, near modern Denizli. These were thriving Christian communities in the 1st century. But today, Turkey is 99% Muslim. Christianity has almost completely disappeared from the land where the early church was born. Why does this matter prophetically? Because it shows Turkey as a spiritual battleground throughout history. The early church flourished there. Then Christianity was persecuted and driven out. And now, Turkey is positioning itself as a leader of the Islamic world. The land that once hosted the 7 churches is now hostile to Christianity. That's not coincidental. It's prophetic. Connection number 3. Turkey equals part of the revived Roman Empire. Daniel 2:7. Daniel prophesied about 4 great empires, Babylon, Daniel's time, Medo-Persia, Greece, Rome. Daniel 2:40-44 predicts that the Fourth Empire, Rome, would be destroyed but revived in the last days as a confederation of nations. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron. For as much as iron breaketh in pieces, and subdueth all things, and as iron that breaketh all things, shall it break in pieces and bruise. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay, and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. But there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, which shall never be destroyed. The feet and toes represent a divided but connected empire in the last days. Most scholars identify this as a revived Roman Empire, possibly the European Union, or a broader Mediterranean/Middle Eastern coalition. Here's what matters. The Roman Empire included Turkey. Modern-day Turkey, ancient Anatolia, was a major part of the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantine Empire, for over 1,000 years. So if there's a revived Roman Empire in the last days, Turkey could be part of it, either aligned with Europe or leading an Eastern revival of Roman territories. The bridge between Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. No other nation occupies this unique position. Turkey isn't peripheral to end times prophecy. Turkey is central. But understanding Turkey's biblical identity is only the first step. Because what Turkey is doing right now, in 2025, is positioning itself exactly where these prophecies predicted. Let me show you how modern Turkey is reshaping the Middle East in ways that align perfectly with Scripture. Number 2. Turkey is reshaping the Middle East right now. We've established that Turkey appears in end times prophecy. But biblical identity alone doesn't prove we're in the season of fulfillment. What proves it is when modern actions align with ancient predictions. And that's exactly what's happening with Turkey right now. In the past decade, Turkey has transformed from a secular, Western-aligned nation into an increasingly Islamic, regionally dominant power. Turkey has become a major military power. For decades, Turkey was a NATO member, but not a major military threat. It had a defensive army focused on protecting its borders, not projecting power regionally. But that has changed dramatically. Turkey now has the second largest army in NATO. Personnel: 355,000 active troops, 379,000 reserves. Only the United States has a larger NATO military. This isn't just size. Turkey has modernized its military with advanced systems and indigenous weapons production. Turkey is no longer defensive. It's conducting military operations in Syria. Turkish forces control portions of northern Syria. Why this matters prophetically? Ezekiel 38:4 says God will put hooks into thy jaws and bring the invading coalition forth with all thine army, horses and horsemen, all of them clothed with all sorts of armor. Turkey is building the military capability to join or lead a major regional conflict. The army is ready. The weapons are deployed. The experience is being gained in Syria, Libya, and elsewhere. Turkey is confronting Israel. For most of modern history, Turkey and Israel had diplomatic and military ties. They cooperated on security, trade, and intelligence. But under President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, that relationship has collapsed. Turkey has cut diplomatic and economic ties. Turkey has recalled its ambassador from Israel, blocked Israeli ships from Turkish ports, ended military cooperation agreements, supported anti-Israel resolutions at the UN. Erdogan positions himself as Islam's defender against Israel. Erdogan doesn't just oppose Israeli policies. He frames himself as the defender of Palestinians and the Muslim world's leader against Israel. In 2024, he said, "Turkey will be the one to stop Israel. The West has failed. America has failed. We will not fail." Transformation number 3. Turkey is aligning with Russia and Iran. The Ezekiel 38 triad. Here's where it gets stunning. Ezekiel 38 predicts 3 primary powers in the Northern Coalition: Magog, Russia, or Turkey, depending on interpretation; Persia, Iran; Meshech, Tubal, Gomer, Togarma, Turkey. And today, those exact 3 nations are forming an alliance. The prophetic triad is forming. For 2,600 years, Ezekiel's prophecy seemed impossible. How could Russia, Iran, and Turkey ever coordinate? But today, Russia and Iran are military allies. Iran supplies drones to Russia. Russia supplies weapons to Iran. Russia and Turkey cooperate despite tensions. Turkey and Iran share opposition to Israel and the West. The 3 powers Ezekiel named are aligning exactly as predicted. Every one of these transformations positions Turkey exactly where Ezekiel 38 predicts it will be when the Northern Coalition invades Israel. But now we need to examine that prophecy in detail, because Ezekiel 38 doesn't just mention Turkey. It describes Turkey's role in one of the most dramatic events before Christ returns. Let me show you what the Bible reveals about Turkey in the Gog-Magog War. Number 3, Turkey in Ezekiel 38, the Northern Coalition. We've established that Turkey is mentioned in Ezekiel 38. We've seen how Turkey is transforming in ways that align with prophecy. Now, let's examine Ezekiel 38 in detail, because this chapter describes one of the most dramatic events in the end times. The geographic pattern, all from the north. Notice the repeated emphasis on north, verse 6. Togarma of the north quarters. Verse 15. And thou shalt come from thy place out of the north parts, thou and many people with thee. Ezekiel 39. 2. And I will turn thee back, and leave but the 6th part of thee, and will cause thee to come up from the north parts. This invasion comes from Israel's north. And which nations are north of Israel? Turkey, directly north. Syria, north. Russia, far north. Iran, northeast. Every nation in the coalition is positioned north or northeast of Israel. What happens in the invasion? Ezekiel 38 to 39 describes the invasion and its outcome. 1. The invasion begins. Ezekiel 38, 8 to 16. The coalition invades Israel, comes like a storm, covers the land like a cloud. Massive army with numerous troops. 2. Israel appears doomed. Ezekiel 38, 14 to 16. The world watches as the coalition surrounds Israel. It looks like Israel will be destroyed. 3. God supernaturally intervenes. Ezekiel 38, 18 to 23. God himself destroys the invaders. Ezekiel 38, 22 to 23. If Turkey is part of the end times invasion of Israel, it makes sense that Turkey would be Islamic, not secular. It makes sense that Turkey would see itself as a leader of the Muslim world. It makes sense that Turkey would oppose Israel ideologically, and religiously. For 80 years, 1923 to 2003, Turkey was secular. But in the past 20 years, that has completely reversed. The transformation is prophetic. The coalition members. Let me identify each nation Ezekiel lists. Persia. This is easy. Persia is modern Iran. No debate. No ambiguity. Iran is explicitly named as part of the invading force. Ethiopia and Libya. The Hebrew words are Cush and Put. Cush, ancient territory south of Egypt, likely modern Sudan and Ethiopia. Put equals ancient territory west of Egypt, likely modern Libya. These are North African Muslim nations. Gomer. As we discussed, Gomer settled in Turkey, ancient Anatolia. The Sumerians, descended from Gomer, occupied central and western Turkey. God himself destroys the invaders. Ezekiel 38:22-23. And I will plead against him with pestilence and with blood, and I will rain upon him, and upon his bands, and upon the many people that are with him, an overflowing rain, and great hailstones, fire, and brimstone. Thus will I magnify myself and sanctify myself, and I will be known in the eyes of many nations, and they shall know that I am the Lord. Fire, hailstones, pestilence, earthquakes, confusion. They turn on each other. The armies are destroyed supernaturally. 4. Only 1/6 of the army survives. Ezekiel 39:2. Ezekiel 39:2. And I will turn thee back, and leave but the 1/6 part of thee, and will cause thee to come up from the north parts, and will bring thee upon the mountains of Israel. 83% casualties. The coalition is annihilated. 5. It takes 7 months to bury the dead. Ezekiel 39:12. Ezekiel 39:12. And 7 months shall the house of Israel be burying of them, that they may cleanse the land. The death toll is so massive that Israel spends 7 months burying bodies. 6. It takes 7 years to burn the weapons. Ezekiel 39:9. Ezekiel 39:9. And they that dwell in the cities of Israel shall go forth, and shall set on fire, and burn the weapons, both the shields and the bucklers, the bows and the arrows, and the handstaves, and the spears, and they shall burn them with fire 7 years. For 7 years, Israel uses the invaders' weapons as fuel. The outcome: Turkey's army is destroyed. When the Gog-Magog war happens, Turkey's military is supernaturally destroyed by God. This isn't a God himself destroys the invaders. Ezekiel 38:22-23. And I will plead against him with pestilence and with blood, and I will rain upon him, and upon his bands, and upon the many people that are with him, an overflowing rain, and great hailstones, fire, and brimstone. Thus will I magnify myself and sanctify myself, and I will be known in the eyes of many nations, and they shall know that I am the Lord. Fire, hailstones, pestilence, earthquakes, confusion. They turn on each other. The armies are destroyed supernaturally. 4. Only 1/6 of the army survives. Ezekiel 39:2. Ezekiel 39:2. And I will turn thee back, and leave but the 1/6 part of thee, and will cause thee to come. God himself destroys the invaders. Ezekiel 38:22-23. And I will plead against him with pestilence and with blood. And I will rain upon him, and upon his bands, and upon the many people that are with him, an overflowing rain, and great hailstones, fire, and brimstone. Thus will I magnify myself and sanctify myself. And I will be known in the eyes of many nations, and they shall know that I am the Lord. Fire, hailstones, pestilence, earthquakes, confusion. They turn on each other. The armies are destroyed supernaturally. 4. Only 1/6 of the army survives. Ezekiel 39:2. Ezekiel 39:2. And I will turn thee back, and leave but the 1/6 part of thee, and will cause thee to come up from the north parts, and will bring thee upon the mountains of Israel. 83% casualties. The coalition is annihilated. 5. It takes 7 months to bury the dead. Ezekiel 39:12. Ezekiel 39:12. And 7 months shall the house of Israel be burying of them, that they may cleanse the land. The death toll is so massive that Israel spends 7 months burying bodies. For 7 years, Israel uses the invaders' weapons as fuel. The outcome: Turkey's army is destroyed. When the Gog-Magog war happens, Turkey's military, along with Russia, Iran, and others, is supernaturally destroyed by God. This isn't a conventional war where Israel defends itself. This is divine judgment, where God himself intervenes. And Turkey is part of the army that faces that judgment.